Welcome to the Album Anniversary Podcast. Today's show is for the week of March 11th through March 17th, and I'm your host, Caleb, or Caleb the Spy on Twitter and Instagram. And this week, joining me is Bjorn. Hi, Bjorn.
Hey, Caleb.
So glad you're here. Glad you can join me. And people might know you from, I'm going to mess this up, the Dan Bacchitis podcast handle on Twitter.
Yep, that is it.
And you contribute a lot to the CCM Twitter conversations. And where did you get the idea of parodying? Because it's a parody of the Sadie Hawkins pod. So where'd that come from?
Dan and Jess, they run a really good show on Sadie Hawkins pod. I don't know, just one day I was thinking like Dan Bacchitis had the same amount of syllables. So I was just like, it's just the perfect Relient K joke. And I didn't really have like an outlet for that joke. So I was like, I have to make this joke. So I photoshopped their logo, made that account just for that purpose. And it's kind of just become my main thing now.
That's awesome. So do you have your own Twitter account too? And it's like, this one's kind of become the main one you do?
Yeah, I've had other ones, but they don't really do anything. So
one of the albums that we'll end up covering later is one of Relient K's albums. So obviously that, and then you also were interested in talking about the Switchfoot album. So I go back and forth. I do talk about a lot of Christian music. I talk about other stuff too. But what's your kind of connection with the Christian music and CCM stuff?
I was raised on Christian radio stations, and my dad would always play Toby Mac and Family Force 5 CDs in the car. So it's kind of always been there.
Okay.
And then back in high school, I started listening to Owl City, Relient K, Switchfoot, and it's been pretty much my main music for a while.
Okay, cool.
Well, like you, I'm a big Five Iron fan.
Nice.
I also like Showbread, Me Without You, Nickel Creek, all kinds of stuff.
Well, that's awesome. That was for me in high school. That was about the only thing I listened to. And then post-college, I kind of expanded out some other things. So you mentioned a couple of your favorite bands. That's cool. That kind of helps getting to know you. I'm assuming you've been kind of paying attention to the CCM tournament that Eric runs. Is there a band you're pulling for in that? I mean, it sounds like you have a couple favorites in the running.
Mm-hmm. So it looks like Switchfoot and Me Without You are going to be going up against each other in the next round. So, I mean, if I were to hope for one winner, it'd probably be Me Without You.
Nice.
I mean, Relient K is probably a realistic choice for a winner, but...
And Me Without You, they won the Tooth and Nail one that Eric did last year, so
yeah,
I think they have a real chance. Cool. Every day on social media, I post about what I call album anniversaries. It's just the anniversary of the album's release date. A couple years ago, I created a calendar and started documenting the release date of some of my favorite albums. And then I would go back and I'd celebrate those albums on that day. I might post something on social media or just to take an opportunity to re-listen to the album. During the last year, the list of albums has grown significantly, and now I have every album I own tracked, as well as a bunch of different recommendations that people have sent in. I don't have a ton of extra time to talk about those albums when I post about them on social media. Just keeping up with all the albums that I have to get ready to post takes a ton of time. So I started this podcast as just a chance to sit back and kind of talk more about some of my favorites from the week. I try and listen to almost every album I post about, although I don't get through them all. And I just try and take that opportunity to this podcast just to talk about them. I totally love ska, punk, and alt rock. And in the 90s, I was super into the Christian music scene. Occasionally, we'll talk about some news or take a look at other things going on or other things I'm listening to. Unfortunately, the sad news of the week on Tuesday, March 12th, we learned that Michael Knott had passed away at the age of 61. And I don't know about you, but I feel like he's kind of a monster of the Christian alt rock music scene. How familiar were you with Michael Knott?
I had a passing familiarity, but I mean, man, it's just terrible to hear about. He was definitely creative. That's one thing.
I've said this a couple times. I feel like he's hard to kind of get into. His discography is almost intimidating because he was in so many bands, and there's even bands like Lifesavers versus Lifesavers Underground. What's the difference? I don't know. Like it's a pretty expansive discography. There's a great website called knotheads.com that's categorized or like kind of tracked a lot of his career. And it's a good place if you're trying to jump into it and learn more. It did go down earlier in this year, although it was back up this week. So I don't know if they just forgot to pay the bills on it and it went down, but So that's a good one. And yeah, I just feel like his influence was pretty far reaching. Like I think I know Five Iron mentioned him at their last show at Cornerstone in 2003. Just how he was so influential to them. And I know a lot of other artists really felt like he was a big deal. So I think it was pretty interesting to kind of read up some of the things that were written about him. And then Lars Gottrich, the one thing I wanted to mention, he had a nice article on NPR about him, and I thought the lead quote on it was, "An entire industry wouldn't exist without him. Yet few know his name. Michael Knott, a brash and brilliant pioneer of the alternative Christian rock scene, who challenged the faithful to examine their faults and hypocrisies." Died on Tuesday. So sad news to hear about Michael Knott, but there's a lot of stuff to go back and check out in his discography.
Yeah, he really had his hands everywhere.
He did. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah. So 2 of the albums that he had his hand in just happened to be on my calendar for this week. I didn't move them up in the calendar, and it's the 2 Browbeat albums. And these are albums that it's not just him. There's a bunch of other stuff on them. So I thought I'd mention those early in the show, just kind of a little tribute to Mike Knott. And then we'll jump into a couple other topics. We'll go back to the CCM tournament and a couple other things. So the first one is the Browbeat Unplugged, and that was released, I don't know the dates for these. It was released sometime in 1993, and this is mostly coordinated by Knott. He also contributed a couple songs, and this it's a really good listen. Have you ever heard this one?
No.
The Browbeat compilation? Okay. So some standouts on it, I'll go through them quick, is The Choir, Poor Old Lou, Knott himself does a couple songs, Terry Scott Taylor of Daniel Amos, and the Thoreaus, I'm probably not saying that wrong, LSU, and then Adam Again. It's a really good album. I don't think it's on streaming, but I think you can find it on like eBay, and I think somebody's uploaded it to YouTube. So the Browbeat Unplugged from 1993. And then the second of the Browbeat compilations, and I think that's how you say it, Browbeat, that's how it looks. It sounds weird, but is Witherwing, and that was released sometime in 1998. And this one was different. Knott wrote all of the songs for it, and I think all of the lyrics, and then they had a bunch of guests, like people come in and sing on it. So it's not as good, but Knott does like vocals of 11 or like 4 of the 11 songs, and it's not quite as good as the other one. The first song is there's a band called Everyday Life that were kind of like a rapcore band, and that's the first song. It's almost a little jarring after coming off the first one, but overall they're worth checking out. I think they're interesting when it comes to Mike Knott. So sad to hear about Michael Knott for sure, and I hope a lot of people check out his music. Let's talk about the CCM tournament. I want to. The first round is done, and I was looking at the results. Are there any shockers to you, or like anything that happened that in that first round that kind of threw you off?
I wouldn't say any surprises, but I mean, of course, Skillet winning over Falling Up was kind of painful for me.
Yeah,
I'm not super familiar with Falling Up yet, but I know they are a fantastic band. And Skillet, I mean, they've got their winners, but I mean, controversies aside, they've kind of dropped in quality, I'd say.
Yeah, I've never really been a Skillet fan, and Falling Up, I've really only gotten into the last year. I think mostly because of Eric, to be totally honest. And I've started going to check them out. Again, I've said this often on the show, but 2004, I was kind of out of the Christian music scene. So I think their first album comes out right in 2004. So I mean, I was kind of leaving. I wasn't getting a lot of new bands. But yeah, that was a bummer as well for me to see them drop. And I don't have a whole lot of affection for Skillet. I thought one of the interesting ones was Sanctus Real winning. Not that I think they're bad, but they beat Lauren, I'm going to say her name wrong, Daigle? I don't know how you say her name. But she's super popular right now. So to see her lose first round, I thought that was a bit of a shock to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because Sanctus Real really doesn't belong in the 2010s. Like, was their best work back in the 2000s, maybe? I don't know. It seems interesting that they're even in that category. And for them to beat her was interesting to me.
Yeah.
I thought Delirious, they put up a heck of a fight against MXPX, but just couldn't hang on in the end.
Yeah.
And then Whiteheart beating BB and CC Winans, I think that was a bit of a shock just because Whiteheart wasn't even in the tournament last year and just the streaming numbers are so out of whack. But Whiteheart winning was kind of another bit of a shock. And then Andrew Peterson beating Owl City. Was that a bummer for you? You mentioned Owl City earlier.
I do defend Owl City quite a bit, but I understand that people don't really like him anymore.
Well, that's another one where the streaming numbers are so different, because he did the seeding
Yeah.
by streaming, and Andrew Peterson had a 15 and Owl City had a 2. It was like, holy cow, not even close. Oh, I was Sleeping at Last. I can't believe their streaming numbers are so high. Because they were a number 3 seed, only behind in the 2010, only behind NF and Owl City. So just a lot of streaming for Sleeping at Last. So I thought that was interesting. So other than that, I only got 4 wrong. I filled out. Did you fill out a bracket beforehand? Like who?
I did not. I didn't bother predicting because I knew I'd be terribly wrong.
I only got 4 wrong in like who I thought I would win. My who I wanted to win was totally busted because I would have gone for Steve Taylor. I'm not sad Amy Grant beat him, but Steve Taylor would have been my winner if it was just me voting.
Hard choice between those two.
Yeah, totally. That's the streaming numbers. I mean, Eric said it. He said when he set it up that it was like, yeah, he knew there was going to be potential issues with the seeding, that you'd have some. I mean, you said it earlier. Me with you versus Switchfoot second round. That's painful. That's painful. So this isn't news. I want to be really clear. I do not think this highly of myself, but it was this week. I think it's tomorrow, so we're recording this on Saturday. A year ago on Sunday, I wrote what I call my 5-Iron Frenzy manifesto. It was during the middle of last year's tournament, and 5-Iron was winning, and it got to a point where it was pissing people off, which you mentioned being a 5-Iron fan. I'm like borderline obsessed. We have a joke in our house that every conversation really ends with, eventually every conversation ends up talking about 5-Iron Frenzy. And it was just hard to see like all these people being upset about it. And so I wrote it was like 25 tweets, I think, just going on about why I love them and why I think they're great and why I think so many people connect with them. So I plan on reposting that, I think tomorrow. And when did you discover 5-Iron? I mean, speaking of that.
Well, I mean, of course, Reliant K has their 2
yeah.
little songs about them. But at the time, I was pretty content with just my 3 first love bands. So I never sought them out until I think it was 2 or 3 years ago now.
Okay.
I had never even listened to any ska or anything before then, but yeah, they completely won me over.
Yeah, I think if you're a Reliant K fan, it's pretty easy to kind of see the relationship between them and kind of see where you can say I think they both would speak incredibly highly of each other. And there's some great stories even too about Switchfoot, because Switchfoot and 5-Iron went on tours when they before Switchfoot blew up, and I remember 5-Iron just being like, well, yeah, they're way better than us. They're gonna be so much bigger than we ever are. so it's some good connections to some of those bands. So have you watched The Greatest Night in Pop on Netflix?
I have not.
Okay, it's great. It's a little documentary about the We Are the World song. It's worth watching if you're a music fan. I think it's an enjoyable little thing. Obviously, it's pretty one-sided in the sense that it paints it all as rosy, but it's really fun. As a guy who's really into Bob Dylan and his dad who was really into Bob Dylan, it's worth it for the Bob Dylan sections alone, because you start looking at everybody who was there for the We Are the World compilation, and he is the odd duck, that's for sure. He does not belong in that group, so it's a fun little watch. First album up on the docket is The New Way to Be Human by Switchfoot, which came out in 1999, so celebrating a 25-year anniversary.
Drives him away from the ones that he loves. Mike was right. Hey, Mike, we're one and the same. We're the faceless combatants in the loneliest game of it. Say, I'll wave as I'm driving by with that smirk in my eye, yelling, hey, I'm something bad, check me out. I got the company car. I'm the one swinging to the low part. Yeah, I've become one with the ones that I've
So this is their second album. One of the big songs off here is Only Hope, which was on A Walk to Remember. I don't know if you remember that movie. My wife really likes that movie. I don't.
I haven't seen it. I probably will check it out eventually just for the Switchfoot connection.
Yeah, it was prominently in it. I think I'm not a big rom-com guy, so it wasn't something. Mandy Moore was the lead in it, but Only Hope was in it. It was on the soundtrack. It was made a big deal of it. And this is not the album that I think really made them a star, but I think this is the album that really paved their way. I think they started to, this kind of moved them into being on the main stage in some of the old Christian music festivals. And this kind of paved the way, because the next album is Learning to Breathe, and then they blow up 5 years after this album comes out with, or 4 years after this with A Beautiful Letdown. So Bjorn, you had mentioned that this was one of the albums you wanted to talk to. So what's your connection to this album and kind of some of your thoughts about it?
So Switchfoot was one of the bands that was always there, on the radio as a kid for me. I mean, I'm 22. I grew up right around their time, but I never really got like into them until I was in college. And then for whatever reason, I started at the beginning of their discography.
Sure.
Which was an odd choice. Legend of Chin didn't grab me that much, but I liked it. But this album just totally blew me away from first listen. I mean, like, Sooner or Later, just completely otherworldly song. Love that one. Only Hope, Under the Floor. I mean, it's just straight tens all the way through, I'd say.
I have it in my notes that I think 7 of these 10 songs are not just good, but legitimately great. I mean, if you listen to the show at all, if an album gets too long, I'm out. The punk rock ethos of me. But so like this is 10 songs and there's not a bad moment on the album, and 10 of them are legitimately like, these could be a band's best song, so it's really good. I think it's got a great pop sensibility. I think I like that sort of thing. Like there's some really fun musical moments that go back and forth. And so I like that about it as well. And I think, like you mentioned, a lot of the songs you're mentioning, they're kind of from the back half of the album. I think the back half of the album is just as strong, if not even stronger than the first half, which is really interesting to me.
They saved the really emotionally impactful stuff for the second half.
Totally. I made a list of my it's bigger than 150 now, but I made a list of my 150 favorite albums. This comes in at 126 for me. I think the lyrics are really clever as well. And so it's at Ink of Reality. He's a person I go back and forth with on Twitter. He called it the best follow-up album ever, which I think is good. I mean, a lot of bands hit that sophomore slump. And like you said, Legend of Chin is good. This is a huge step forward in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I think that was a really good take. The idea that this is a sophomore album that's significantly better than the first album.
Yeah.
So,
and I might get criticized for this, but I'd say that Learning to Breathe was a bit of a step back.
Okay.
I think it had some filler. I mean, certainly the title track is a winner, but
sure.
I mean, there was some stuff that could have been cut.
I don't know where that ranks in my list.
Speaking of title tracks, though, New Way to Be Human, it's all right, but it's probably my least favorite track on the album.
Okay. Well, that's a good sign.
I'm a sucker for title tracks. I love them. But this one doesn't do much for me.
I love the idea of being a sucker for the title track, which makes sense, I think. If the title track doesn't hit, that's a good call out. I think it used to be one of my favorite, but I think some of the other songs have probably overtaken it in kind of being that. One of those is Company Car. That song gets stuck in my head whenever I listen to it. Then it's like for days I shouldn't sing, but that song gets stuck in my head really, really bad. So the other thing that I thought about when I was listening to it this week was I feel like it's really well constructed, kind of how it moves from upbeat to slower songs really wonderfully. Like there's these up moments and then these down moments. I mean, it has a wonderful flow. Like again, like there's just, it's put together really well. I don't think you could rearrange I wouldn't rearrange the track list at all. Just the way it flows, it just, they seem to really put it all together on this album. So
Yeah.
again, that is A New Way to Be Human by Switchfoot. We're celebrating a 25-year anniversary, released in 1999. Bjorn will be back to join us throughout the show to add commentary to a number of different albums as we go. Hiding Place by Matthew Smith was released in 2014, celebrating a 10-year anniversary.
More than light, blind I ran the sinful race. I felt no need for a hiding place. Oh, but then the eternal council ran. Almighty love, arrest this man. I felt the arrows of distress and found I had no shield, no hiding place.
This is the fourth album by Matthew Smith. He kind of had a shorter EP, but I think I count this as album number 4 by Matthew Smith. It's all of his old hymns made new. So it's taking old hymn text and writing new songs and new melodies and new music for those hymns. I think it is the most genuine and best form of worship music for me. Matthew got his start with Indelible Grace and has gone on to be on every single one of those albums, as well as producing a bunch of his own solo records. I think his solo records are great. They're some of my favorite albums. And I'll say it, I wish we got more from Matthew Smith. I wish we got more out of from him. I just don't know if he can make it work financially, but I think his music is absolutely fantastic. It's some of my favorite music, and I love the old hymns made new. That is my favorite. I've mentioned it before. It's my favorite type of worship music, and it's just the worship music that I wish more churches would do on a regular basis and on Sundays. It's absolutely great stuff. And this album is no exception. This was, I believe, the follow-up to Watch the Rising Day, which is still my favorite album by him, but this one is also very, very good. There's nothing necessarily musically that's going to blow you away. It's, fairly straightforward. That it, again, is doing what he does best. It's taking those old texts that he knows are solid and are good and are communicating your good, clear messages, and he's taking those and he's just adding this new melody and harmony. He's made comments on social media before about how that's why he likes U2 so much, and he's less concerned with lyrics and more with that melody and harmony. And I think that's what he brings to this type of music, and specifically this record. And again, there is not a bad song on this album. It's absolutely solid all the way through. There's a number of great songs. One that has always stood out to me is Whatever God Ordains is Right. And this is an excellent song. It's got some really cool percussion work, and the bridge goes really, really hard, which I know sounds a little silly to say that this hymn goes really hard, but it absolutely does. Minor Threat's complete discography was released sometime in 1984, so celebrating a 40-year anniversary. There's a couple old punk rock albums that I want to just briefly go over. These are not stuff that I necessarily am really, really connected with, but they're important in the history of punk rock. And so, like I said, Minor Threat's complete discography released sometime in 1984. And as the name implies, this contains the band's entire discography at the time. My understanding is it includes 3 EPs. It also includes their Out of Step album and the Flex Your Head compilation tracks. So it's a number of songs put onto this, and this was a great way to grab all of those and kind of listen to the entire thing. And again, I don't necessarily love Minor Threat. It's kind of this hardcore punk rock stuff. I like it. I like that stuff, but they're important to punk rock history. And this is just a great way to go in and grab all of it. You can check out all of Minor Threat's songs by grabbing this one discography. It's kind of like the Operation Ivy, self-titled Operation Ivy. You can get all their music because they weren't around for a super long time and they're important to a style of music. So Minor Threat's complete discography. My War is a studio album by Black Flag, and it was released sometime in March of 1984, so also celebrating that 40-year anniversary. My War is the second full-length studio album by Black Flag, and it was the first of 3 full-length albums the band released in 1984. Again, let me be clear, they released 3 full-length albums in 1984. That alone is pretty impressive, and the phrase that gets thrown around for this one is that punk meets Black Sabbath, and I think it's punk meets Sabbath, but I think it's punk meets Black Sabbath. And the sound would have a really major influence on a lot of the grunge bands. So the second half of this album is a little less punk and a little more kind of fused with heavy metal. And again, a lot of grunge bands cite this as a really, really important album for them. So that's why, again, I don't necessarily love Black Flag, but I think they're important for punk rock. And I like them. I want to be really clear. I like them. I enjoy listening to them. And this is an interesting album for that. And again, I think some ways, some of these bands, some of these old punk rock bands, I like it more for the history of it than the actual albums. And it's interesting to see and listen to it and understand, oh yeah, you can totally see why this then was this influence into the grunge scene. And I'm a little less enamored actually with the second half, even though I like grunge music. I'm just a huge walking contradiction, but this is absolutely, if you're into grunge rock or you're into punk rock, I can't believe I called it grunge rock. What is wrong with me? This is absolutely an album that you should check out. This makes a lot of those best punk albums or most influential albums, punk rock albums of all time. So My War by Black Flag is an absolute must check out at some point. Seven Swans by Sufjan Stevens was released in 2004, so celebrating a 20-year anniversary. This was Sufjan Stevens between, I'm going to mess this up, Illinois and Michigan, and I might have those out of order. But this was, again, a 20-year anniversary, and I really, really enjoyed this. I'm not a huge indie pop guy. I feel like when I want to listen to that sort of stuff, I usually go towards just listening to Sufjan Stevens. I know there are a lot of people that kind of sound like him, but I listened to this twice on its anniversary. Now on the day before, I will say I was at work and I was doing some stuff, and so I was very much on in the background, but I think this is an absolutely a lovely album. It's very beautiful. I think this is, in my opinion, these are the things that Sufjan Stevens does really, really well. I like that he's gotten to expand and try some other things, but this really is his bread and butter. And I just think it's a really wonderful album to listen to. Again, it's not something I'm going to go back to a ton. And if I do want to listen to kind of that indie pop style stuff, I'm not going to listen to, and I'm being a little facetious here. I'm playing around a little. I'm not going to listen to this Sufjan Stevens knockoffs. I'm going to go with the real thing, and I'm going to listen to an album like this, or Michigan, or Illinois. I think those are the other two titles. Again, I'm not a huge Sufjan Stevens guy. I want to be a hipster, and so I want to dive deep into these albums. Those were some of the albums celebrating large anniversaries. Something ended in a 5 or a 10. But there were so many other great albums that came out that I do want to just touch on briefly. And Bjorn's going to join me again to talk about a couple of those here and there. I do want to mention March 11th. It was such a great day. I think there was 13 albums that I posted about. I'm going to talk about at least 10 of them on this show, or at least mention 10 of them. And that's how great of a day it was. There was just so many great things coming out on that day that were worth talking about, that were worth celebrating. So let's talk about a couple of those albums that came out on March 11th. March 11th, 1997 had 4 albums that I want to talk about, and then we'll go on to other years on the March 11th date. The first one is Americana by Starflyer 59. This was released again, like I said, 1997. This is their 3rd album, and it's another solid outing. Again, they will probably never be a favorite of mine, but I really respect their game, and every time I put on a Starflyer 59 album, I really do enjoy it. I really do like the experience. It's probably not an everyday thing for me, but going through their albums like this, where I celebrate them on the anniversary and take a chance to listen, just again continues to grow my affection and my appreciation for Starflyer 59. This was another great album, a great listen. Let's Face It by the Mighty Mighty Bosstones was released in 1997. Amazingly, because this was their first big hit, this was their 5th album, and this is one I know we've been flying through some of these. Bjorn, you actually have a little familiarity with this one. What are your thoughts on this album?
I mean, Bosstones are just so prolific. Ska as a genre is just like, it's this whole new thing for me. Because like, I mean, you ask any of my friends what they think about ska, and they don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
But, so I mean, I try to spread the word. It's just such a great style. Bosstones do it great. That one song impression that I get, it's probably one of the first songs I'd show someone if they were curious about ska. It's very catchy, very fun.
So I mentioned I watched that ska documentary about the 90s ska scene. At one point, one person was like, "Oh, the Bosstones were the 90s ska scene," which almost threw me off a little because I just wasn't expecting it. And I know that was, in my opinion, the 3 big ska hits from the 90s. One is Sell Out by Real Big Fish. One is The Impression That I Get. And then probably you got to throw No Doubt in there just because I know they're not. That album that hit big, Tragic Kingdom, isn't a ska album, but it always gets linked back to it. I think this song is. That Impression That I Get was kind of that 90s ska in a bit of a nutshell in a lot of ways. Cool. Well, I'm glad you went back and found them because they're an interesting band to check out, and they've got a lot of variety in some of their music. Also from March 11th, 1997 is The Waiting's Self-Titled. This was an album that was included in the Smash Hits tournament that Eric ran last year, and this was their 2nd album. I felt like this image was everywhere. It's the man standing in front of the train. I've talked about it before on this show. Put the Blame on Me is an interesting song, like theologically, it's kind of interesting. I didn't catch all of it maybe, but it's an interesting song. It's still not as charming as Bluebelly Sky for me. And Hands in the Air was mentioned several times on Twitter. Lots of people really digging that track. The Touch soundtrack by Dave Grohl was released again March 11th, 1997. And I think I've talked about my period of time where I was really obsessed with the Foo Fighters. They're really important in my musical journey in the sense that they helped me really start to look back into music history and some of those old rock and roll bands that the music that I was enjoying in the 90s was built upon. And so the Foo Fighters are just an important band for me. So yeah, I have this album, even though it's pretty obscure. Dave Grohl did all the music for this Touch soundtrack, and there's a number of really good alt-rock instrumentals, and this sounds a lot like early Foo Fighters, especially the song How Do You Do? So a worthwhile album to check out. I think it's kind of hard to find. Moving on to March 11th, 2003, it was kind of a great day for punk rock, and it was a great day for a lot of albums, as I posted all day long on that day. I didn't actually post all day long. I set them up ahead of time, but my Twitter was running all day long, continuing to post stuff. The first one I want to talk about is the 2003 release of Ghoti Hook's R.I.P., which is their live album, was kind of their last album. So, Bjorn, any familiarity with Ghoti Hook?
Yeah, I made sure to check them out at Furnace Fest. I was a little familiar with the music beforehand.
Okay.
I mean, their show was just amazing. They're great performers. The crowd was just cheering for them to play Banana Man the whole time, but they didn't, which was sad because it was the song I'm most familiar with.
Okay.
But,
okay.
It was a great little set. Lots of moshing.
Okay.
So that was one of the highlights of the fest.
They're really funny. I only saw them a handful of times back in the 90s, but I remember them just being a riot, just constantly cracking jokes, and the drummer would never stay behind his drum kit. He was always running out to the front to make jokes in between songs, and I remember them being a pretty good one. I really love Ghoti Hook, and I think this was a fitting send-off. I know it really wasn't a send-off because now they've come back and done a couple things here and there. I have an old t-shirt that says Ghoti Hook is more fun than a can of meat. I unfortunately do not fit into that shirt anymore, but I did. When I was listening to this week, I caught myself kind of pumping my fist at my desk. The Essential Clash by The Clash, really on the nose there. That was also released on March 11, 2003, and this, I think, was one of the ways I started to go back and check out The Clash. I think it's a great collection. It really captures the Essential Clash, which, again, it's a well-named album. The Essential Clash really does capture the Essential Clash. Two lefts don't make a right, but three do. 2003 by Relient K.
Okay, so who doesn't own a cell phone? Who brought back their permission slip? Because I know nobody wants to stay home while the rest of us go out and make a day of it. Cause theme parks are so much more fun when the sun's outside. And I lost my phone to the lake beneath the Batman line. The start of something.
This was another big one on Twitter. This is their third album, and I thought their first two were good. Again, 2003, I'm starting to head out of the Christian music scene in a lot of ways, but 2003's release, this is their third album. Bjorn, obviously, running the Dan Bacchitis Twitter handle, clearly a connection to Relient K. You've mentioned a couple times. So walk us through what you love about this album.
To me, it's just a perfect cap off to their early era. I mean, there are so many mainstays that, I mean, they really just knocked it out of the park with some of these. Chapstick, Pink Tux, College Kids. People have thoughts about Mood Rings.
Yeah, yep.
It's controversial, but it's a well-written song, musically at least.
And it's still a song they play. I mean, they have not gone away from it, right?
Yeah.
It's still a song in their set list, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
occasionally I'd say
okay.
They did apologize for it, but
yeah, it's a great opening track. That Chapstick is the first first
yeah.
song. And I think that's a great opening track.
Mm-hmm.
So where does this album rank like for you in your Relient K discography?
I mean, I hate to say it, but I think it's a little bit below Collapsible Lung. And
Okay.
that's not to say this album is bad. It's just that I like Collapsible Lung a bit more than people normally would. It's definitely above the previous two.
Okay. So of the old stuff, this is a favorite of yours, of those three.
This is the best of the olds.
Okay.
But at 15 tracks, it might be a bit much.
Yeah.
I think I'd just rather listen to a shorter album. Not that there's necessarily any bad ones here, but it's just a bit long.
I can get with that. I can understand that. There's a little filler even there. I know a lot of people like Gibberish, but I don't need that song.
I could take it or leave it. Yeah.
So when you were this was a band that you were like, this came out when you were in kind of listening to Christian music at the time or listening to music in general?
Well, I mean, I didn't really start listening to music until high school.
Okay.
But this was one of my first.
Cool. I think, yes, it's a very solid pop punk outing, kind of their last pop punk album. I think this is the transition. I think this is really a big step forward from the first two, and I think they would keep on making those step forwards. I've come to I've come to be okay with them as more of a pop group than a punk group, and that's really enhanced my enjoyment of them. And I have the same note. It's a little long. There could be some sensible cuts, yeah. But I will say, that said, I think Jefferson Airplane I don't know what it's about necessarily, because I think lyrically it's kind of all over the place, but I think it's one of their better closing tracks. I don't know what it is about that song, and it might have just been the nostalgia for me, but I really loved that song a ton.
Yeah, I really like the bridge, how it kind of just completely transforms the song.
Yeah.
And I actually heard the demo version off of Bird and the B-Sides first.
Oh, really?
So I mean, getting familiar with that version and then hearing this version was like a complete mind blow moment.
That's a funny way to go into it. That's like the band, really. You hear the demo first and then hear the real one. That's pretty funny. I think it's almost like some of their later stuff. Like, because some of their other stuff is played a lot with tempo and kind of changing things up and kind of moving. And that's what I feel about that song. Again, I'm not a musician, so for me, it's all about the feel of an album and of a song. So yeah. A couple more from March 11th, 2016 saw Painkillers by Brian Fallon. Look, I really like Brian Fallon. I really like the Gaslight Anthem. This is good. It's not amazing. I will definitely always check out anything that he puts out. 2017 saw the release of Anti-Clean by The Bad Man. Again, 2017. This is a Minnesota ska punk group. They're kind of rock and roll. They're kind of ska. They're kind of punk. It's 9 songs. It's 19 minutes. I really enjoy it, and I like The Bad Man. I don't know if we're going to get any more music from them. And then 2013 was Home by Off With Their Heads. This is, again, a punk rock collective. I think I've mentioned them before. I didn't actually have a chance to go back and listen to this, but shout out to the Minnesota punk band. Out of Time from 1991 by R.E.M.
The links that I will go to, the distance in your eyes. Oh no, I've said too much. I set it up. That's me in the corner. That's me in the spotlight, losing my religion.
This was their 7th album, but this is their breakout. This is their transition from this indie college radio darling to international artist. I will say it, Radio Song is so weird. It's such an interesting, weird opening track. Honestly, in a lot of ways, this album is kind of all over the place. The transition from Endgame to Shiny Happy People to Belong to Half, A World Away to Taxiera. I can never say that one. Teixeira. I always want to say Teixeira, but it's not Mark Teixeira. It's Taxanaraka. I'm really good at doing this. That transition, those 4 songs, is spectacular in a lot of ways. It's all over the place, and yet it's great. It's cohesive. It fits together in a weird way. And Losing My Religion, is that the first huge alternative crossover hit of the 90s? I think so. What a smash hit. Great album, Out of Time by R.E.M. Faith and Heartache by Jeremy Casilla was released in 2002. Again, I love Jeremy. I love his work. He's done some work with Indelible Grace. His solo albums are also absolutely great and totally worth checking out. This is worth checking out if you like that kind of more soft-spoken singer-songwriter. There's not really a bad song on this album. Walking on Water, Psalm 62, and Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah are especially good. Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah is kind of the song he has most done with Indelible Grace. Absolutely excellent. Every version of it is totally solid. 2013 saw the self-titled debut of Citizens, called Citizens. I really should have said that a different way. I'm not sure what I was thinking. I love this album. I remember being intoxicated. That's not the right word, but I remember being just totally blown away by the bass lines on this. They're so fun. There's a bunch of songs on this. Made Alive especially. That was the one where I really noticed the bass driving this group forward, which you don't feel like you hear in a lot of worship music. This is one of the few CCM bands that I still hang around with, that I still am into, and I absolutely am always excited to check out a new album by them. This one, and then their Christmas album, and then one other one I think are especially good. Radiohead released The Bends in 1995. It was their second album. It's my 87th favorite album on my all-time favorite album list. And it's great. It's still a great rock record before they kind of started to switch things up, head over to OK Computer, and then the huge left turn with Radio A, Kid A, not Radio A. They're Radiohead putting out the album Kid A. What's going on? Have I totally lost my mind? It's probably happening at this point. I love this album. It's still absolutely an album you can listen to. It's another, kind of like the Switchfoot album that we were talking about, just wonderfully put together, just absolutely great all around the board. The Grosse Pointe Blank soundtrack from 1997. I love this movie. I love this soundtrack as well. I don't talk about a ton of soundtracks. I may mention them. I do post about them on Twitter, but I did want to call this one out because this is such an example of a soundtrack and music perfectly being incorporated into a movie. The soundtrack just almost feels like the songs they chose, they almost wrote scenes around them. I know that's not how it worked, but I think about the scene where he's holding the baby and the Queen and David Bowie song Under Pressure is playing. It's such a great album, and it fits the movie so well. 2 albums by the Decemberists came out this week that we celebrated. They didn't come out this week. You know what I mean when I say that. First one is We All Rise, Our Voices in the Air. It's their live album that was released in 2012. This is 20 songs. It's 2 hours, but it really captures a wonderful set list. The record that would come after this, to me, was a little bit of a disappointment. So this is a great time to do this. It's a great time for that live album. Sometimes you get those live albums where the most recent record is the one you don't enjoy as much as some of their others, and then the set list ends up being kind of a bummer. But that's not the case here. The other Decemberist album that I would mention is I'll Be Your Girl, released in 2018, and this is a bit of an odd one. It's a bit of a left turn. Kylan from the Church Jams Now crew mentioned that it's kind of when Colin, the lead singer of the Decemberists, kind of discovered synthesizers and just kind of went nuts with it and started to make a bunch of Greek references. I thought that was a great take. This is a bit of an odd album, but I really love this album. It was one of my top 10 albums of 2018, which is saying something because that year had a lot of great albums. It's not like some of their other stuff, most of their other stuff, but it's totally worth listening to. To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar, released in 2015. A lot of inappropriate language on this one. Be aware. It's a little long, but I feel that way about all the hip hop albums. But this is an experience. It's it's pretty clear why this is considered one of the best hip hop albums and really one of the best albums of the last 10 years. If you can handle the language, this is an album you should check out. If even if you don't like hip hop, I feel like there's stuff to behold here because it really is a great album, really worth listening to. This Year's Model by Elvis Costello was released in 1978, and I've talked about Elvis Costello. I talk about him a lot, and I always mention how much I like his older stuff, and this is it. This is the stuff I love. It's so great. Number 16 on my all-time favorite album list. I don't know what it is about this album, but I love it. I own it on vinyl, and it's not an original, but it's an old one. It's not like a repressing from the last couple years when vinyl got big. I love This Year's Model by Elvis Costello. Candy Apple Grey by Husker Du was released in 1986. Shout out to the Minnesota band. This is a great album, some really great alt rock stuff, and it's alt rock, but it's got this real strong pop sensibility. Really, really enjoyable listen. And again, if you like alternative rock in the 90s, you should pay your respects to The Replacements and Husker Du. Shimmer by Luna Halo was released in 2000. And this comes from Eric's favorite albums list, and this was entirely new to me. Bjorn, was this one new to you as well?
It was new to me, but I did recognize the album cover.
Okay.
So I may have checked it out before, but I mean, this most recent listen, it was pretty good. It's pretty typical CCM lyrics, but the music was really interesting. They did a lot of cool effects and stuff. I went and checked out their next album as well. It's a lot heavier, more aggressive. Yeah, I think they were really doing something special.
Cool.
In the scene.
Were you familiar with Reality Check? Because I think that's the band that led into this group, I believe.
No, I haven't.
Okay, that's a big favorite from a lot of the 90s CCM folks. I was not into it. I remember seeing it was everywhere. I remember posters of it everywhere. But yeah, this also, for me, totally new. I was never really into Reality Check, so I think that might have been why this didn't cross me. Because again, I had never heard this in 2000. I'm still about all I'm listening to is Christian music back in 2000, and I thought this was fine. I think again, it's fairly straightforward in the sense of like pop rock, and I think like you said, the lyrically, there was nothing there that was overwhelming. There's a Strange Delirious connection that a bunch of people talked about. Like Delirious had written a song for one of their albums, and they kind of didn't want to do it, and so then they gave it to these guys to do, and they did it, and then Delirious liked it so much they're like, we got to put that on our album. So that was kind of a fun story to hear about. This is a hard one for me. I don't know if you have this problem, but like you hear, especially now, like with CCM Twitter being such a talking point, like this is one of those ones that I think if I would have discovered this in 2000, maybe it'd be something that would stick with me. But it's hard to go back and find old things and then be like, well, I'm never going to see this band live. You're never going to see anything new from them. And so like kind of trying to get back into something that like is long gone, you can do it, but it has to be something that's really special. I don't know if you've had that experience at all of like kind of doing that.
Well, for me, a lot of my favorite bands are long gone. So
it's just kind of a force of habit.
Yeah.
That's cool. So you feel like you could do that with this? Like this could be a one that kind of enters the rotation?
Yeah, probably. I do prefer their other album, but this one was good.
I think there are other ones on my calendar. I think maybe I'll have to check and see if their other one makes it onto my calendar. My other comment, which I make about so many albums, is it was a little long for me. Yeah. By the end of it, I was kind of, let's go. Glorious by Tokyo Ska Paradise Orchestra from 2018. I just want to call out that I love that ska is still really a thing in Japan, and nobody even gets too hung up on it. So there was a ton of other albums even this week that I just didn't get to, that I didn't listen to, or I'm just not going to talk about. And just there's so many great albums coming out. Kansas by Jennifer Knapp. I know a lot of people were excited about that one. Walk Among Us by the Misfits. 99 Songs of Revolution, Volume 1 by Streetlight Manifesto. There was an album by the White Stripes, their live album. I didn't even get to the Velvet Underground because I didn't have time. And Hygiene by Drug Church. just, again, so many. I did listen to Discovery by Daft Punk, and I know that everybody loves that album. I think it's just okay. I know that it's important, and that's why I own it. But yeah, I don't know. I just don't have a whole lot to say about that one. That's it for the week. And Bjorn, I know I sent you the list of kind of things I'm going to be talking about or I'm going to be posting about next week. There's like 14 big albums that are celebrating big anniversaries. And I'll go through those in a second. And then there's another 31 of them that are just kind of those off anniversaries. Are there any albums from those, especially from those big ones that I'm going to post about next week that you're interested in or that you're excited to kind of check out or that it's celebrating a big anniversary?
Fangs by Falling Up is a really cool one. It's kind of where they started the transformation to a more artful sort of thing. They were a bit new metal before, which I did like it, but I mean, my favorite album by them is their 2015 album, self-titled.
Okay,
Fangs is pretty similar to that one. It's very eclectic.
Okay,
I'd say.
Is that because I've heard about this transformation. Again, this is a band that's newer to me. Eric kind of, I'm trying to slowly check them out. Is Fangs a spot where they start to make that transition, or have they already started it?
I'm not too sure. I haven't done like a complete deep dive into their discography, but it is definitely a concept album, I think. Okay. It got kind of a story behind it.
Is it still on Tooth and Nail? I heard that was another big transition for them. It's like when they kind of moved off Tooth and Nail.
I think it was on Capitol, actually.
Okay. Yeah, that's one I'm really excited to, again, just maybe out of just total respect for Eric. Like I've been trying to kind of take in their albums as they come out, just because I feel like they're an interesting band that, again, I totally missed until this last year, and it's just kind of now kind of getting into them. So yeah, I'm excited to listen to that one on whatever day it comes out. So let's go through some of those 14 big ones I'm not going to talk about all of them on next week's show, but they're ones to be excited about. Let's go through them. They're kind of in little sections here. So first is the hip hop section. Mad Villainy came out in 2004. Born Like This by MF Doom came out in 2009. And then Pinata by Freddie Gibbs and Madlib, also known as Mad Gibbs, came out in 2014. So that's the kind of hip hop section. I probably will talk about Mad Villainy. To be totally honest, I don't know if I'll get to the other ones. Some ska albums. MU330's Self-Titled came out in 1999, so that's celebrating 25-year anniversary. And then Out of Nowhere by Hepcap came out in 1994, so that's celebrating a 30-year anniversary. Again, I don't know if I'll get to those. Maybe MU330 Self-Titled. I really enjoy that one. Some other CCM ones, so CCM Twitter section here. Extremist by Demon Hunter came out in 2014, celebrating a 10-year anniversary. The Lime CD by David Crowder Band came out in 2004, so that's a 20-year anniversary. It's Never Enough by Ace Troubleshooter, 2004, a 20-year anniversary. Their last album, I will definitely be talking about that one. The one we mentioned already, Falling Up's Fangs, 2009. That came from Eric's list. That's how I have that on my calendar. And then On the Cover 2 by MXPX, and I'm including them in the CCM Twitter section, came out in 2009. A random one is The Hazards of Love by The Decemberists, 2009, another kind of weird left turn for them. And then just a couple other ones that have made it onto my list here. Staple, their self-titled, 2004. I think that was originally released in 2002. I'm not super familiar with that. Forcified by Tokyo Police Club, 2014. I own that, but I am not super familiar with that one. It's totally slipped my memory, so I need to revisit that one, although I don't know if it'll make it on the show. Unless it blows me away, I'm going to try and prioritize that one. And then Guns N' Roses' Greatest Hits compilation came out in 2004. I definitely won't be talking about that. I got that one out of pure rock and roll importance. I really don't actually like Guns N' Roses all that much. All right, and then there's 31 others that are not celebrating big anniversaries. There are so many of these. I'm going to highlight just a handful of these. Evildoers Beware by Mustard Plug from 1997. Surfer Rosa by the Pixies from 1988. Ska Lives is something that I'm always interested in. Bringing It All Back Home by Bob Dylan. Value Pack self-titled. Armageddon Massive by the Dingies, 1998. Keensby Nights. Keysby Nights by Catch-22, Real Life by Aaron Sprinkle, Motion and Picture by Mears. The name of the band is The Talking Heads. That's a live album by them. Another Decemberists. There's 2 Decemberists next week as well. And I am not going to know how to say this one. It's Perescu? I have no idea how you say that. I don't know if I've ever said that out loud. How embarrassing is that? How embarrassing is that? Redemption Songs by Jars of Clay. Marbles is by a ska band called King Apparatus. Really, really good stuff. Tokyo Ska Paradise Orchestra has one. Another one by Bob Dylan, his self-titled. And then Buck Enterprises released a worship album in 2002. I could go on. The list goes on. So many amazing albums. There are even more of them that I'm probably just not going to get to. And this is probably going to force me to make another kind of change in how I do this. I mean, one of the albums I'm just kind of throwing into the bottom because I just don't think I'm going to have the chance or time to talk about is, Lemonade by Beyonce. That's, considered a really important album, and I just am not going to probably be able to get to it. So I'm going to have to rethink about this format again. Now that things have really, really ramped up, there's so many albums to talk about. How do I do this? How do I get what's really important in, what people want to hear in? And that's why I think it's important. I'd love to hear feedback. I'd love to hear, what people want to talk to me about. I also am enjoying having people on the show, but I'm going to have to rethink about how long this show goes, because I think this is going to be a pretty long one, and that's the way it goes. So let's bring Bjorn back in and let's close out the show. Bjorn, thanks so much for joining me. I know people can check you out at the Dan Bokaitis handle, the Dan Bokaitis podcast. Dan Bokaitis pod handle on Twitter. What are the things you got? Is there other things you have going on that you'd have people check out, or is that that's kind of one place to find you? Is there other places to find you?
That's pretty much the only place to find me. Follow it if you like the occasional Relient K joke.
Well, I appreciate it. It's there's a lot of them make me laugh. I'm not gonna lie. So
thanks for having me on. It was fun.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you could join. And if there's other albums that come up that you want to join me for, we can always. I'm always good to chat about the occasional Relient K and Switchfoot album for sure. So
yeah, anytime.
All right. The music at the beginning and the end of the show is the instrumental version of Sing It Out at Street Level by Peg and the Rejected, which is just the Dingees focused on ska tunes. You should go check out their music. Thanks so much for joining me this week. Let me know what you think. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? What were your favorites from the week? You can find me on Twitter at CalebTheSpy with no spaces. I'm also on Instagram at CalebTheSpy with underscores. And you can email me at CalebTheSpyPodcast@gmail.com. No spaces or underscores. If there's albums that should be on my calendar because they're worth celebrating, please let me know. I added a couple more this week just because people suggested them. So I do take those suggestions and try and get them on my calendar. Please subscribe and share the podcast if you're so inclined. Leave a rating or review. I think it's I've heard it's one of the most effective ways to spread the word about podcasts. And most of all, thank you if you engage with me at all on social media. Like I say this every week, I put a lot of time into setting up all these daily posts. You can see how many are coming out. And so it just takes time. It takes about 5 minutes per album to set up a post and just make sure the music is there. Make sure I have enough typos throughout the week so that people can, question what I've done. I'm doing my best. I hope it's meeting some needs, or at least it's needs probably isn't the right word, but it's scratching an itch for a lot of people. So I hope it is. I'm going to try and keep up with it. We'll see. This is going to get really intense. I'm trying to get really far out. I'm through like half of April. Now it's Sunday morning, but I'm trying to get it way out and ahead so that I can fall behind, or I can take a couple days off if I need to. But I really do appreciate when people engage on social media. And like I said, if you want to be on the show, I think I've said it a couple times. If you want to be on the show, let me know. Reach out to me on Twitter. Reach out to me on email. If there's an album you want to talk about, I think the way I'm going to have to do this going forward is if there's something you want to talk about, if it's one of the big ones, let's find one of those to talk about. I'll just have you on to do that. We may have to skip some of the interview questions just because it's getting really long and I got to find a way to do everything I want. But I'm trying to figure out this guest thing. So I'd love to have more of them. I'd love to have people who want to come on and talk about their albums. And if it's just me, that's fine. I can totally do it. I can sit in my basement and talk to myself. That's perfectly fine as well. All right, that's probably enough for me. Thanks so much for joining me this week, and I will talk to you soon.